Good morning, and welcome to the 2026 Walter E. Hoadley Economic Forecast. I'm David Limecedar from Bank of America, and I have the distinct privilege of representing the bank's sponsorship for today's event. I'm also a member of the Commonwealth Club Board of Governors, and so I can tell you specifically that firsthand, both organizations truly value this time-honored event. In fact, since the 1980s, the bank and the club have come together to provide this annual forecast. The event is named in honor of Dr. Walter E. Hoadley, a former chief economist at Bank of America and a former president of the Commonwealth Club Board of Governors. We honor Dr. Hoadley's legacy, as it was he who personally started this event so many years ago. It carries on today in his name, continuing to be held here at the headquarters of the Commonwealth Club World Affairs, the nation's largest and oldest public forum. Today's event is designed to present multiple different and even at times opposing perspectives on the economic outlook for 2026. In the club's mission of providing multiple points of view, we have different and diverse group of panelists that will offer political, academic, and professional perspectives. The goal is to inform and ultimately allow you to draw your own conclusions as you manage both your professional and personal lives this year. Before we get started, a few reminders. Today's program is being recorded, so we kindly ask you to take a moment to silence all cell phones. We also welcome you to be involved. If you have any questions for our guest speakers, please fill them out on the question cards that were found on your seats. If you're joining us online, please utilize the YouTube chat feature. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have Haim Israel, global strategist and head of the Global Thematic Research Team at Bank of America. With more than 20 years in capital markets, Haim has extensive experience in trading, analysis, and research. Haim is a futurist, meaning he studies trends and signals of change to literally predict the future. I have personally been recruiting Haim for this event for the last 3 years, as he had to make a trip from Israel to be here with us, so we're very honored to have him. Next, we have Stephen Davis, a senior fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Stephen is an applied economist and co-organizes the Asian Monetary Policy Forum held annually in Singapore. He is a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, former economic advisor to the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, and consultant to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Next, we have Martha Olney, teaching professor emerita in UC Berkeley's economics department. An award-winning teacher and mentor, Martha belongs to numerous academic and professional economic organizations and served on the board of American Economic Association's Committee for the Status of Women in the Economics Profession. Moderating today's program, we have Adam Lashinsky, editor-at-large at the SF Standard and contributing columnist for the Washington Post. Adam is an award-winning journalist who has covered the finance and technology industries for over 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fabulous panel for you today. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
All right. Thank you, David, for that warm welcome to all of us. I'm pleased to be back again this year. One thing David didn't mention is if you're going to write questions for me, I have long experience doing this, and I will tell you right now that good penmanship is rewarded. We'll leave it at that. But please give us aggressive questions, because I'm sure yours will be better than mine, and we want to address the issues that you want to address for our outlook for 2026 for the economy, state, local, global. And Martha, I thought we would start with you.
Sure.
You have just written a book that attempts to teach to the layperson what inflation is.
It does.
So very briefly, please tell us, even for those of us who might know or think they know, what we need to know about inflation and how to think about it in 2026 in the United States. And
Yes.
do you focus primarily on the United States as opposed
Primarily on the United
Great.
States.
So take it away,
Okay,
please.
thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the invitation, and thank you all for coming. Let me start with some basics, because I don't know what you all know, and if I see a lot of heads nodding, like, yeah, I already know that, I can go faster. Inflation and prices are a little different. Prices is how much we're paying for things. Inflation is the rate at which those prices are increasing. So if the inflation rate goes from, say, 9%, which is the height that it reached in 2022, and comes down to, say, 3%, which is where it is now, that doesn't mean that prices have gone down. It means that prices are going up more slowly. The only way for prices to actually come down, the way for prices to return to their pre-pandemic level, would be for us to experience price deflation. Price deflation is when prices fall. We had price deflation very briefly in 2009 here in the United States. We had a long period of price deflation in the 1930s as part of the Great Depression. You don't want price deflation. Price deflation is bad. You may think, oh no, how could it be bad? It means things are cheaper. But if things are cheaper, that means that the people who make those things and sell those things will be paid lower wages. And when people are paid lower wages, they have lower incomes. They have those lower incomes in the world in which they already have a lot of fixed obligations. So their mortgage is fixed. They have to pay a certain amount of dollars per month for their mortgage. Their car payment is fixed. They have to pay a certain amount of dollars per month for their car payment. If their income goes down and they don't want to have their house foreclosed or they don't want to lose their car, they have to cut back on all their other spending, what we call their discretionary spending. And what we saw in the Great Depression was exactly that when prices went down and people had fixed payments, particularly for cars in this case, people cut back wherever else they could. We had a huge drop in consumption. It turned a recession into the Great Depression. So having price deflation, which is the only way to get prices back to where they were in, say, 2020 before the pandemic started, has a lot of negative consequences. So we're talking not about returning prices to where they were. We're talking about returning to a world in which we can confidently think that the inflation rate is going to be something we don't have to think about. So the inflation rate from the mid-'80s or so until right before the pandemic was more or less 2.5% to 3% per year. Depending upon which measure you used, it could be a little higher, a little lower. That was low enough that most of us didn't think about inflation very much. It was low enough that you didn't have to plan around what prices were going to do. You didn't think, oh, should I buy extra toilet paper at Costco now before it goes up in price? Oh, that big bag of Peet's coffee is now $22, speaking personally, instead of $14.79. Should I buy two and put one in the freezer before it goes up to $24? We didn't have to think about those kinds of things having to do with inflation when inflation was 2.5% or 3%. The Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, they are the agency that we have that's in charge of trying to monitor and control inflation. The central bank here, the Fed, and also central banks around the world, have a goal of about 2% inflation. They have not reached that goal. So we're at about 3.5%. I have it written down, but I will maintain eye contact and look at my sheet of paper when someone else is talking. I taught for a long time. They haven't reached that goal, and that's one of the things that's driving the Federal Reserve right now, is they want to conduct policy in a way that brings the inflation rate, the rate at which prices are increasing, back down to that 2 to 2.5% range.
Martha, let me sort of prompt you to get to the end of the story, and then we'll circle back and discuss more. But what I'd love for you to address right now, February 2026,
yes,
we seem to have a national consensus that prices are too high,
yes,
and inflation is too high.
Yes.
So what is give us the short version of how you see that playing out over the coming 10 months.
So prices are too high, but I think I already established why prices going back down is not necessarily a good thing. Inflation is too high. The way that the central bank, not just the Fed, but the central banks around the world, the way the central bank fights higher inflation is through the tool that they have, which is interest rates, is by increasing interest rates. They increase interest rates, and they do that in an effort to slow spending, because slowing spending will slow the growth of demand, and it's back to the good old supply and demand that you learned whatever year.
To be clear, I'd appreciate if you I told you my father was an economist, and it would be helpful if you would take just one extra step. As you can explain to everybody,
Yeah.
the Fed actually doesn't control interest rates. It controls the rates that banks pay to borrow. And interest rates are a function of the market, but continue.
Yes. Okay. So the Fed controls an interest rate, which is the interest rate they pay to the banks on reserves. I'm in the weeds here, and the markets determine the other interest rates, and we can talk about why long-term rates went up this morning in the wake of the news about unemployment. But that's weedy. So the central bank uses interest rates to try to affect the economy. If they want to slow the inflation rate, they're going to raise interest rates to slow economic activity. So they're going to raise the rate that they control and hope that the market also raises the other rates. Slow activity. And then we're back to that supply and demand picture that you saw at some point in life. My father took Econ 1 in 1937 in Wheeler Auditorium from Ira B. Cross at UC Berkeley, and had that supply and demand graph, So you saw it if you took any econ. And slowing demand growth will slow the rate at which prices increase. Now, the thing is that interest rates are also the tool that the central banks have to try to affect the rate at which the economy is growing, which affects what's happening to unemployment. So the number of people who have jobs versus the number of people who don't have jobs. Do you want me to do dual mandate right now, or you want me to pause?
I want you to pause, but before you do, for reasons that I'm not now giving you the opportunity to explain, how do you envision this playing out?
How do I envision
by the end of the year, let's say, just to pick an arbitrary date, because that's what we do.
The Fed has been decreasing interest rates a quarter point or a half a point at a time in 3, I think, of their last 4 meetings, give or take. I'll check my notes. I suspect that they will drop interest rates a quarter point at a time, not more than a quarter point. I suspect they'll do that, this is February, probably like every other meeting, give or take. So probably they'll bring their interest rate that they control, they'll bring that one down another 50 to 75 basis points. And then whether the markets follow suit and bring the long-term rates down is a different question.
So what you're envisioning for the year are gradually lowering interest rates and a generally continued robust economy, which we're currently experiencing. Is that a fair paraphrase?
Yes.
Great. Then I want to move on for now to Steve. Steve, one of the reasons we know there are higher prices in the U.S. economy is that this is not monetary policy, but regulatory policy, that the President of the United States has been pursuing a tariff policy that we have not seen perhaps ever. It's certainly not in the last 100 years, including the time before the Depression. Economists said uniformly that this was a terrible idea and that it would result in havoc. It has not resulted in havoc, but it has resulted in some higher prices. So would you discuss this in economic terms as you're looking at it?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks to the audience for being here. A few things. You're right, we've never seen a tariff policy quite like this. We have seen tariff rates this high before in the 1930s. That was a consequence of legislation that set those tariff rates in stone, so to speak, or at least on paper, and they were then pretty stable for a long period of time. So what distinguishes the Trumpian approach to tariff policy isn't just that tariffs are a lot higher than they have been for many decades, but they're also a lot more volatile. They are subject, apparently, to the whims of the president. I mean, that's quite clear, both in terms of the way the administration has conducted its tariff policy, but also the way President Trump speaks. Now, there is, when you look at this carefully, and there are now quite a few studies that look at this carefully, clear evidence of a few things. That the vast majority of the tariff hikes are passed through at the border to the prices paid by Americans, defined as the importers, the businesses, the consumers. So we know that. That's one point to understand. Second thing,
And that was predicted, right? That was assumed.
that was what most economists thought would mainly happen, and I think we've now, and just in the last few months, have clear evidence that that is what happened. What's also become increasingly clear over time, and this is really important, is the actual tariff hikes are not only a lot less than President Trump originally announced. We kind of know this if you just follow the headlines in the newspapers. But they're also a lot smaller. They're still big hikes, but they're a lot smaller than the statutory rates that have now been imposed. And the reason for that is there are many product-specific and company-specific exemptions that have been granted, sometimes because the administration fears the economic repercussions of a high tariffs on certain things. People get upset, and there's a political reaction. But also, there's some political horse trading going on. So, just to put some numbers on the table, if you just took the statutory tariff rates that were in place as of, say, October, and you applied those to trade volumes in 2024, you get a number of around 27% tariff rate, which is much. You have to go back to the 1930s to get something comparable to that in the United States.
That's a gross average you're expecting?
That's a gross average across all the different kinds of goods and services we produce. But if then you look at the effective tariff rates, which counts for all these exemptions, the fact that many people, wholesalers imported before the tariffs actually took effect and all this stuff, it's more like 14%. 14% is still really high, but it's not as high as you might think just from a casual reading of the newspaper. So we do get some effects on prices. The last thing to note here is that thus far, most of the burden that's borne inside the border of tariff hikes is for companies, importers, wholesalers, companies, rather than consumers. They've only gradually been passing through the effect of the higher import prices to consumers. That's probably going to continue unfolding over the next year. And it's one factor, by no means a huge factor, but it's one factor that will continue to put a little upward pressure on the inflation rate.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, Martha. Yep.
Since you're the tariff guy, is it possible, even like conceptually, to put tariffs on services? Because a lot of what we buy are services and not goods. And if tariffs are applied only to goods, and that 14% number is striking, and I feel like the graph on the Yale Budget Lab website has the best way of seeing the
But Martha,
impact.
to help people
But
understand
can you
your
put
question,
tariffs
what's
on
an example of a
services?
non-U.S. service?
Well, travel is a big one, right? So a big import is international travel. So whenever we go out of the country, we are importing travel services from other countries.
What might a tariff look like that you're envisioning?
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Well, a couple things. Let's take the travel example,
Yeah.
and then a very different example. Say we buy consulting services
Yeah.
abroad.
Yeah.
The travel example, well, we have to go back to the world where we're actually controlling people's foreign exchange and so on, because we'd have to say, okay, you want to go to Barbados and have a really nice vacation, spend $10,000 in the week. You have to exchange some currency, and we're going to charge you a premium on that. That would be possible. That would take us back to the Bretton Woods era, if not earlier. So that seems like completely out of the box for now. But there are companies, U.S. companies, that purchase services from abroad, consulting services, software coding services, purchasing services from India. In principle, it would you'd have to create probably a fuller administrative apparatus. In principle, those could be taxed. That is entirely feasible. We don't do much of that now.
Okay, and then before we move on to Chaim, thank you for your patience. I want to paraphrase back something to you that I heard you say to make sure that I understood it correctly, which is, one concern economists had was that these tariffs were going to hit the consumer hard, and that would hit the economy hard. And you said, generally we haven't seen that and you're not expecting it.
No, I am expecting. What I said was that thus far it's mostly shown up on firm profits, their margins that they get over what they pay for their imported prices. I didn't mention it yet, but it's also showing up for domestic manufacturers who import inputs that they use to produce products for export. Okay, so it's showing up there. It is showing up to some extent on consumers, and that extent will probably increase over time as firms gradually restore the margins that they normally have.
And do in your work, do you look at the political impact of such changes? Do you measure that?
Well, the politics of tariff setting are really intrinsic to the process. You think about all the executives who are going to the White House, it's become even more apparent, to beg for tariff relief.
Yeah.
Think of Apple. You can't put these massive tariffs on the iPhones that we import from China. Otherwise, our business model is going to be sunk. So it's very political.
Let me be more explicit. The scenario that I'm trying to envision is, and I'll try to dumb it down, which is if the price of cars and the price of washing machines become exorbitantly expensive because of these tariffs, and the average consumer / voter becomes pissed off, they are going to want someone to blame.
Yes, that's already happened.
Your evidence for this is the midterm, the by-elections, the off-year elections.
There's that, but
New
there's
Jersey and
also
Virginia.
it's also the Trump administration's own behavior. They have retreated on many of their
Good.
tariffs,
Yep.
partly for the reasons that you just identified.
Popular opposition. Great. Chaim, you traveled a long way, and we absolutely want to hear from you. Explain to the room what thematic investing is and what the themes. I know you look out very far into the future, so tell us what you're interested in whatever time frame you like, but including the coming year.
Perfect. Yes, I've been a little bit patient because I don't agree with anything that was said over here.
Fantastic. Now we have a panel.
Now we have a panel. And I'm going to wake everybody up. First of all, it is an introduction. I look 5 to 10 years down the line. I'm trying to understand what are the big megatrends which are impacting our life, how our life are going to look like, good or bad, in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and what are the big megatrends which are really impacting them. And from listening to what I say over here, we are really, really missing the big pictures. Now, I have a dual major in economy. I have masters in economy. Those masters are not working. They're just not working anymore. We are in the middle of the #1 revolution humanity have ever seen. Trade, politics, geopolitics, investment, inflation, deflation, everything is impacted by one thing and one thing only, the AI revolution. We spoke about cars coming down, goods coming down, prices up, inflation. There's one thing that the price is coming down dramatically, and we're not talking about that enough. The biggest revolution, the AI revolution, which I said I think is going to be bigger than the internet, it's going to be bigger than the mobile revolution, is coming because of one thing and one thing only. The cost of intelligence are going down to zero. Economy, societies, history, everything that we do is one thing, intelligence, chasing intelligence. Our progress, our growth rate is all kind of intelligence. The mobile phones, the apps that I have on my mobile phones are more intelligent than I am. Way more intelligent, and they cost zero. The cost of intelligence is going down to zero. You think that Trump is putting tariffs because he's just woke up and decided not to correct the trade balance? No, it all comes down to the race on technology. Whoever controls AI is controlling the world going forward. This is the most radical technology we've ever seen. Now, the problem that we see when we talk about technology, about AI, is that we think about ChatGPT. We think about Claude. We think about Gemini. This is not AI. It's only one application. To say AI is about ChatGPT is to say that we build the internet revolution to have Spotify. Or we build the mobile revolution to book an Uber. It's only one application. The application is so much bigger. And what we're seeing right now, the cost of intelligence are going down to zero. Societies, education system, the job market is changing. MIT study came out last week, said that today, because of AI, today, right now, 12% of US jobs could be eliminated. $1.2 trillion of wages could be eliminated in 2 hours. So we can talk about 1% here, 1% there. This is not what's going on. And the story is so much bigger. US and China in a race on technology, on energy, on resources, on rare earth metals, everything to power this revolution, which is, by the way, if I have a futuristic view, it's a preview to a much, 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 much bigger revolution, the quantum revolution, which is going to dwarf what AI is doing to us right now.
So let me try to focus that fire hose of information that you gave us. So for example, and I know you mentioned that China and the United States are engaged in a competition.
It's a war. It's not a competition.
Well, okay, a
It's
war. But I'll try to play devil's advocate with you on that. If the trend is as massive as you say it is, who cares about a nationalist competition? The price of intelligence or the cost of intelligence is headed toward zero, and it will be developed whether the U.S. or the Chinese compete
I completely agree with you. And this is the reason why we need to talk about nationalism, because governments understand that, or at least the two governments understand that. And they're trying to put more and more blocks, more and more silos around that IP will not flow between different countries. That if Apple is being approached by the US administration to stop iPhones in China, it's not because jobs, it's because the IP stays in China. Because everything they're doing with Siri and Apple Intelligence, everything stays in China. And US does not allow, will not allow that. Same thing with Google, same thing with Meta, same thing with any other company over there. Governments understand that we're heading into a very radical scenario going forward, which social orders could change dramatically.
May I jump in here
Please.
on this?
Please.
A couple things. I didn't actually hear much disagreement with what we said.
No, disagreement-
just a
Maybe he's
statement
getting to
about importance. But let me. I just want to inject a couple counterpoints. One is it's very hard to contain ideas for very long. So I share your view that technological leadership in AI is a very important consideration for national security matters. So I'm on board with that. The idea we're going to bottle it up, though, and keep other countries from obtaining it, that's just contrary to everything we've seen in recent decades with respect to the spread of ideas. But I also wanted to push back on this idea, this notion that somehow 12% of the jobs are going to disappear in 2 hours or something. This is a tremendously transformative set of technologies associated with AI. But I approach the kind of prediction exercise in a different way. And that is that this technology is going to play out very, very differently across sectors, parts of the world, companies. The knowledge of how that's going to play out is very dispersed. And you can talk to the technologists in Silicon Valley, and I hear them a lot, being at Stanford, and I've heard remarks like this. But if you actually go and talk to the people who are on the ground, which is, I think, a more useful way to try to get at least a near-term forecast of what's happening. So that's what I've done in my research, where I go out and survey senior business executives in the United States and in other countries. And I've been doing this for a decade through, you mentioned in the introductions, the Atlanta Fed. Well, I helped found the Survey of Business Uncertainty that's fielded monthly by the Atlanta Fed. So what we do in that survey is every month we ask thousands of business executives, among other things, well, what has AI been doing in your company, and what do you foresee for it to do in your company in the next 3 years?
Because you're asking the wrong people.
Well, no, these are the people.
Executives are not the people to ask.
No.
Well, let him finish, and I hear you.
I'll
And
disagree.
Sorry about that.
I'll
discuss
disagree
that.
on that one. What we're not asking them what we think AI will do to the economy. We're asking them about something they know a lot about, their own company. We say, what do you think it means for your company looking back and looking forward? And then we aggregate the results. And there you find, there's some important stuff going on. But it's not going to change the whole economy in 2, 3, 4 years.
Okay, I'll give you. I need to give you one number. How many companies have traded in the United States in the last 100 years?
Have what? I'm sorry?
Traded, publicly traded in the United States in the last 100 years. 68,000 companies traded.
Yeah.
3% of them outperform risk-free rate. 97% underperform for one
Sorry,
simple.
they outperform what?
Outperform risk-free rate.
Risk-free rate.
Risk-free rate.
I see. In other words, putting your money in a
exactly.
T-bond.
97% have underperformed the T-bills. Why? Because executives always refuse to see that changes is coming. I'm running a very profitable company. I'm running Bank of America, very profitable. It's been so profitable for so many years. Now this kid is coming and telling me I have to invest billions of dollars because in 2 years' time I'm not going to have a business.
I don't quite see the relevance of
Yeah,
that.
I think
relevance
there's a
is very important.
syllogistic nature to that. The logic doesn't necessarily flow that because
no logic.
they don't beat the risk-free rate, they're, I don't know, stupid.
Because no, it's not it's stupid. It's because the human nature is to ignore the long term.
Let me, and I want to ask you a pointed question on that to Steve's point, because I think, Steve, you said you don't see in the 3 to 4 year time frame the sort of changes that Chaim is talking about. And
I see them at a very small level. These things unfold over many years and decades. So I share his view. There's a revolutionary set of technologies here. It's just adapting them to the actual world is a very slow, long process.
What is your best guess on the time frame of the sort of stuff that you're
So much
talking about?
faster than we've ever seen.
I know, but what?
What? I'm a big. Well, and we published that, and it actually create a lot of headlines. In the next 3 to 4 years, 28 to 29, there will be two kind of companies. Companies that use AI in everything that we do, and companies that won't exist. Look at the software sector. We're living in one of the biggest tech revolution. Unemployment in technology is all-time high. People cannot get jobs. Look at what's happening with all the software companies just in the market in the last couple of weeks. 10% down every day. Every day. Look at the market, look at media, look at advertising, look at services, look at everything that we see. And that's not because companies are not going to gain. Companies are going to gain so much because companies are refusing to see the change. And companies are not willing to understand that things are changing.
Martha, what are your thoughts from the things that you look at on this discussion so far?
On the AI side, I don't look at that at all professionally. I just look at it as a person. My sense of things is that what's happening, for instance, that China is embracing AI much more than the United States, that there's a lot of resistance to AI in the United States. I think if you look at the social media chatter after the Super Bowl, and there's a lot of backlash to all the AI ads that came out during the Super Bowl. I think there was this one ad, I forget what it was, Gen Spark or something, that basically they thought they were advertising their firm and they were saying, we're going to eliminate all of your jobs. It's like, oh, okay. And what you're not addressing is that if all of these jobs are eliminated, are we talking about Hoovervilles around the world? Are we talking about mass suicides? Are we talking about, what are our youth? What are our young adults? What are our 40, 50, 60-year-olds? What are they going to do to get money to put food on the table?
This is an amazing question. I completely agree with you. I agree with you. We are seeing technology developing very fast. We see disruption in every sector out there. We've just seen how universities are completely seeing their graduates not getting jobs anymore. And governments are not approaching that at all.
I'm sorry, but
this is a problem.
we don't see those things. We have a 4.2% unemployment rate in the United States. The economy continues to expand the number of jobs. It's true that younger college graduates are having more trouble finding jobs now than they have in the past. Historically, they've typically done rather well in the labor market. That's less true now. These are serious concerns. But the idea that jobs are disappearing everywhere, it's not borne out in the data to date. It's not borne out in what businesses see happening to their own individual companies when you aggregate it. Will there be struggles in this transformation? For sure. We've seen struggles before in previous downturns. It's also just worth noting, if you just look at things like the government has long-running statistical series on numbers of jobs lost, number of people claiming unemployment insurance benefits. These things are much lower now than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Have you asked anyone?
Excuse me, before you, and that's, I assume, generally because the economy is so much more efficient than it was several decades ago?
The economy is actually a lot less dynamic. There's actually a lot lower risk of job loss today than there was in the days of our parents and our grandparents.
But also the job search process is more efficient today than it was
because of
in
certain
those
tools.
days.
Now, I
Because of the
interrupted you,
tools.
Chaim.
Yeah.
You had a response to Steve on that.
No, I probably would say again, I would one of the key things that we're saying, we look at historical trends, and we're trying to understand what happened. And as a result, to come up with forecasts. Now, history maybe does not come up and return itself, but it tries quite well. My view is that we cannot start thinking and look at what happened in history and think that right now with this AI revolution, which no one foreseed, by the way, we can come up with the same conclusion because 40, 50 years ago, this has happened. Digitalization is a new thing. We don't think about that, but we are with smartphones only 12 years. No, the real revolution started only after the App Store came out and after Google Play came, not when the first iPhone was introduced. The real revolution was 12 years. Can you even imagine your life before that? But we are still counting on models which were built with Keynes 40, 50, 20, 100 years ago, which are completely irrelevant right now. And we have to start thinking in completely new terms. We are looking at investments which are hundreds of billions of dollars, which just sparked up in the last year or so. Everybody asking if that's real or right investments or wrong investments. But $600 billion of investments were thrown up just by the Magnificent Seven in the last year. How the models are changing with that? No one was speaking about that. We have Meta announced on data centers which are going to be bigger than the island of Manhattan. It's built in Louisiana. It started build up 8 months ago. We don't even start to think about that as well. This is not. May
I inject a note of agreement that was actually floating around here that I want to draw attention to? I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, there's a common shared concern that the regulatory impulse in the United States to restrict the development of AI and its application could put the United States at a disadvantage relative to China in that competitive sphere. I share that view, okay? And I think I'm just drawing out what seems to be the one common thread of agreement here among all of us.
I agree.
Now, one thing I'm interested in pursuing with you, Chaim, and would welcome an observation from you too as well. You mentioned market caps of enterprise software companies coming down dramatically. I find that extremely unimpressive and unremarkable. These are companies that had extremely high valuations by any traditional metrics, and so the investors goofed on that for several years, and now they're reacting in the opposite direction. Who cares? Similarly, there's no persuasive evidence that because the Magnificent Seven are making hundreds of billions of dollars of investments that they know what they're doing. Do you have in your thematic approach do you put in a scenario where they have massively overinvested, and there's a correction to that because they don't get the returns that they assume they're going to get?
Yes.
Because they think they're very smart. We know that.
There are two things we want to ask. First of all, your answer is definitely yes, and I'm going to explain in a second, but I want to just also a touch point on the point that you made before that about what's happening with the software companies, a few other companies, and the valuations and matrices. I always say ignore valuations. Ignore. No, what's the right PE for a company X or company Y? Is it 20 times PE or 22 times PE to really make a change? And the reason is
not to do a schoolyard chant, but you started it. You raised the issue of the valuations.
It's the valuation. Yes, the valuations are coming down dramatically. That's why I say when we are talking about and this is why I started my conversation with the ChatGPT's mistake that we keep making. When the big Mag 7 are making all those big investments, they are looking at a completely different market. I'll give two examples. A year ago, the US government have teamed up with Microsoft to reinvent the battery market. And Microsoft, what Microsoft and batteries, materials, lithium, what Microsoft has to do with that? Microsoft used regenerative AI simulations, and in 80 hours simulated all the different materials and came up with composition of two completely new materials, which the US is going to start working on very soon. In 80 hours. $2 million of investment, 80 hours, and they reinvent a $500 billion market. What's the right PE for Microsoft? I really don't know. Now, the Google, or one of the subsidiaries of Google, it's called AlphaFold, with $1 million investment and 30 days of AI simulations came out with a drug for liver cancer. $800 billion market a year. $1 million investment. So we can discuss that, whether the multiples are right or wrong. They are seeing a very, very different market than a ChatGPT that can shorten my email or build my presentation. This is not what the story is about. I do look at the risk. As you mentioned, this is very important. We are overbuilding right now, or we can say we are overbuilding right now. We're building a lot of data centers all over the world, investments in energy, investment in infrastructure, investment in many things. And the technology is going to come. But the quick question we need to ask ourselves is the timing. The returns for many companies is still not there because because a lot of executives are not implementing AI in the right way or pushing back all this stuff. So the returns are not coming. So the demand as a result is going to be is going to take longer than the investments are. So we are looking at a short to mid-term financing gap. And this is the risk for me. I have no doubt that all these data centers, all those investments are there and should be, and we have to use them. We have a great example with the fiber market back in 2000 during the internet revolution. Everybody criticized the telco operators for putting so much fiber out there. 2000, we're at 2025. Anyone that has spare fiber is going to be a billionaire right now because the demand is going through the roof. So that took 20 years. Now it's going to take so much lower.
Fiber is a good example. It's not the only one. The railroads went through the same exact thing. They overbuilt, but railroads were a tremendous advancement, and people made fortunes. So we've seen this before. I want to ask Martha another question about the Fed, so I'm going to change the subject in other words. But before I do, I think that there's a general consensus among people who pay attention to this sort of thing that there will be some sort of massive market correction to the AI investments at some point, after which it will continue on to its glories. Do the three of you? Well, but let me ask the question this way. Put a probability on that correction happening in the next 12 months. First, you, Chaim.
Define correction, yes. The answer is yes. But the answer
some
is
sort of 20%-ish reduction in...
Yes, because there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of dumb money, there's a lot of stuff that is just looking for AI. And I think that we're very close to a 2000 situation. But for me, 2000 was not a correction, was not a meltdown, was not a bubble. Because Google was born, and Apple was born, and Meta was born, and all those companies were born in 2000. And if you would invest in 2000 in these companies that were in a garage at the time, we will not be here. Let's put it this way: if we invest in them, and I think that we are very close to this situation.
You made a face, Martha, about my asking, "What will we see it this year?" What was your face?
My face was I don't know anything more than somebody who's concerned about her own 403Bs, which is that I've been anticipating a correction and still am in the relatively near future. We'll see if I'm right.
Yeah,
Steve?
I'll just say there is a good scope for correction, not just because of revisions in the assessment of the profit returns to the technology itself, but also because the profit streams that are anticipated are far out, which means they are very sensitive to interest rates and willingness to bear risk. And that could shift for reasons that have nothing to do with AI, just the overall economy, the conduct of monetary policy, the geopolitical atmosphere. So those are risk factors that could independently affect the valuation ratios that are attached to these technology companies now.
So we agree.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask you all, but starting with you, Martha, the expression economy in the academic sense, people forget that the full expression is political economy, right? And we are in an unusual political time, and you study the Fed. So explain to us. We had it. Everyone in this room. I'm looking around. We're all of a similar vintage in this. Most of us are. We grew up in an era when it was sacrosanct that the Fed was independent of the executive branch, and that was a good thing for a central bank to have independence.
Yes, my face is except Arthur Burns and Richard Nixon were a little codependent.
But it was a brief period. So Where are we and how concerned should we be about the independence
Okay.
of the United States Central Bank?
Okay. Before I get to that, I want to tag on one thing that Haim said, which is in terms of the models, certainly, I gave the overview of what the Fed does and how the Fed fights inflation and didn't get into any of the nuance. And the nuance is certainly that the economy is different today than it was 40 years ago, different than it was 60 years ago. And why 40 years ago? Well, 40 years ago is the last time we had to fight high inflation. And so when we were fighting the high inflation that came with COVID, there was both this sort of looking back to what we had done in the 1980s, which many people in the room may remember the 1980s, but you had to be at least 60 to remember what happened in the economy in the 1980s. Because people who are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, unless they're incredibly precocious, are not paying attention to the economy. So people were looking back to a period which most people who were looking back didn't remember, but at the same time acknowledging that the economy had changed. And models are always running behind what's happening, right? Because you don't build a model for a world that doesn't exist. You build a model to understand a model is just a story. It's just an answer to a question. And you develop these answers to these questions based on what has happened. And models have a very, very hard time, whatever model it is, I don't care what field it is, models have a very hard time with change, with turning points, and that kind of period. And I think that's, I take that point.
Agree.
Independence of the Fed. I think you're kind of seeing it happen, the concern in real time, which is the concern about the independence of the Fed. The Fed was created in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. It followed on about 50 years of national banks, which had been created in the 1860s. And the Fed was created by Congress, but created to be a quasi-independent agency of Congress in the sense that they are not funded by Congress. So they're not subject to those appropriation bills that give us these periodic now shutdowns of the federal government. The chair of the Federal Reserve Board, which is based in Washington, D.C., does go to Congress periodically and testify to the Senate Banking Committee. But the Senate Banking Committee can't say, Chairman Powell, you must do this. The president can't say, Chairman Powell, you must do this. So the whole fight right now in the courts over the attempt of President Trump to fire Lisa Cook, who's somebody I've known since she was in graduate school and is a good friend of mine. The attempt to fire Lisa Cook is about whether or not the president of the United States can put their hands in and muck around with the Federal Reserve. Why do you want to have an independent central bank? You want to have an independent central bank because the executive branch has an incentive to in our case, get reelected. They get reelected if the economy is booming. At least that's what history shows us. Can't look into the future. You can, but I can't. I'm an economic historian, so what can I say? People get reelected when the economy is booming. What makes the economy boom? Well, if it's cheap to borrow, people will borrow more. Businesses will borrow more. People will spend more. Businesses will spend more. There'll be more spending. There'll be more jobs. Everybody will be happy, and we'll be singing dun 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 dun. And so lower interest rates do that. But all of that spending, if there's not enough goods to satisfy all of that spending causes inflation. So low interest rates in an environment, at least this is the way we understand the economy, I grant your point. Low interest rates in an environment in which all of that demand that's created by low interest rates can't be fully satisfied cause inflation. And that's why you don't want the executive branch setting interest rates, because they have an incentive to keep interest rates low in order to get reelected. But those low interest rates have an impact on, we think.
So we want the Fed to
Boosting
do what it
inflation.
thinks is best as opposed to what the elected representatives of the people think.
Given that
best.
their goal is dual, controlling inflation and boosting the economy.
I want to
Go
jump
ahead,
in
Steve.
here. So I share the concerns about the executive conducting monetary policy for political reasons. But I think it's important to understand that the Fed is not blameless for its current political predicaments with President Trump. The Fed has made mistakes, in my judgment, in at least two areas. One, technically in the conduct of monetary policy in 2021, 2022, failing to recognize the surge of inflation until quite late in the game, and then responding very vigorously once they did. That's point one. Point two is the Fed has exceeded its mandate. Independence comes with accountability and a narrow mandate. So the Fed has stretched beyond its mandate, sometimes because politicians wanted it to, in many ways, to things like extolling the virtues of green finance, making comments by Chairman Powell on the conduct of fiscal policy in the wake of COVID. And this argument that we just heard, which I am sympathetic to about independent monetary policy, does not extend to everything the Fed does. The Fed does a lot of things that don't have anything to do with monetary policy directly. They're about financial regulation. So I think the compelling case for independence in the conduct of monetary policy also comes with adhering to a narrow mandate, sticking to your knitting and not getting involved in things which are highly political and politicized by their nature. And the Fed, since the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, has ventured more beyond its narrow mandate and created the conditions for the current predicament it finds itself in.
You know, if I could make an observation, your second point is super interesting and sobering, and I think helpful to the dialogue. The first point sounds to me like if they were acting in good faith and made mistakes, then human beings will make mistakes. There's not necessarily anything to learn from them politically, from them having made mistakes. What I do want to ask you, Steve, before I move on to your questions, we're going to go right there in a moment. I'd like you to survey the unusual political environment where we have a president of the United States who is behaving in a way that no president has ever behaved. You know, we pick a fight with our closest neighbor, Canada. We aggravate our closest allies in Europe. As you say, you know, we impose a tariff at 10 o'clock in the morning and we pull the tariff at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Can you generalize about what impact this will have what impact the government will have on the economy going forward?
Yeah, it's a huge package you just opened.
I understand.
Up there. First, I will say, and there's quite a bit of evidence to support this, that in several domains, particularly in the trade policy domain, but more generally this government by fiat is unusual in the history of the United States. I'm not saying it's never happened, but in the modern history, it's very unusual. It is damaging in my judgment for many reasons. I'll just name two, which I think are quite important. One, in the international arena, the United States is now viewed as a much less trustworthy, reliable, not just ally, but economic partner. And think about the conduct of your own personal economic affairs. Do you want to enter into a close business relationship with somebody that you don't really trust, that they don't, that they're not really good they're not really going to stick to their agreements? No, you don't. That's how the rest of the world, including many of our closest allies, are feeling about us now. They may say nice things to President Trump. They may offer him gifts because they're trying to curry favor, which brings me to my second point. One of the most distressing aspects of Trump 2, much more so than Trump 1, is the parade of leading business executives who basically go to D.C. to engage in ring-kissing exercises so that they can try to curry favor with the president and his close associates in order to get special favors for their businesses, because they recognize quite rightly that the president has, in the current environment, the power and let's say the vindictiveness to punish them in ways that is very harmful to their commercial interests if they do not toe the line. That's not the kind of society that I want to live in going forward, and it is not how United States became the richest and in many respects freest country in the world.
Great. Chaim, real quickly, I want to ask you briefly, yes or no-ish, because we have some really pointed questions that I want to get to. Do you factor scenarios like what Steve was just articulating into your 10 to 15 year outlook?
Definitely, and I agree with Steve. And in many ways, I think that we're heading into a world that President Trump is taking it to a much more extreme in terms of geopolitical uncertainty. Comes off anywhere from tariffs to relationship, but we're heading into a world of more and more uncertainty. This actually started with Corona. AI is expanding that dramatically. That the whole geopolitical system is right now changing, and because now the race for technology, we're going to see that much more. to some extent, the reason why we're seeing that we're irritating your neighbors, not my neighbors, well, I have enough neighbors with my probably with my neighbors. Canada is sitting on one of the largest untapped resources of natural resources that the US needs right now. Greenland, the same thing. Venezuela, the same thing. And a few other countries. And
We don't particularly need oil. I thought you were going to make an argument
You need
that we need rare earths.
You need rare earth.
But Venezuela
and
doesn't
you
have
need and you need nuclear energy. That's what you need right now. And you need a lot of uranium, which Canada holds right now.
But they would gladly sell it to us. I'm just not sure what the point is.
You want it.
Okay, but no one's denying it to us.
No, no one's denying it for you, but you want more control of it. And I think that what we're seeing right now with those tariffs is a way to get to the terms that you need it.
And we don't need to agree or disagree on the propriety of it all. Your observations are your observations. Let's try to go as quickly as we can. We have lots of subjects that we didn't broach yet. So from YouTube, can the panel speak to the cumulative effect of the weakening dollar, tariffs, and world instability? The cumulative effect of these things. Steve, briefly?
I'll just say very quickly, other things equal, that makes it easier for, say, the U.S. to export goods and services, which is an argument that's advanced. But the flip side of that is often not so clear. The flip side of the point is made is often all the things we buy from abroad, they're going to be more expensive if the dollar is weaker. And insofar that the weaker dollar reflects less confidence in the U.S. government and the U.S. economy more generally, it also means higher interest rates that we got to pay. And we haven't talked about it yet, but the United States government has a very large outstanding debt obligation that's already chewing up much of taxpayer funds. And unless we do something about it, that's going to continue to worsen. So we actually benefit when foreigners have confidence in the U.S. economy because it does push up the dollar exchange rate value, but it also means the rest of the world is willing to lend to us on better terms.
Good point. So if I could paraphrase, you're saying that the political uncertainty that exists, and so I'm not ascribing motives, although I easily could, contributes to these issues.
Yes.
Okay. Different.
May I offer one observation about the weak dollar? So I'm not know if it was deliberate or not deliberate, but the weak dollar also, all those hundreds of billions of dollars of investment that we just spoke about, which give or take half of them are going to come from other countries, the rare earth metals, everything around that actually helps as well. I'm not sure it was deliberate, that you will probably know that better.
Helps or hurts?
Helps. No, helps, because you need to import a lot of stuff for all this stuff.
It makes it cheaper to buy.
So it's going to be so much cheaper to buy. A lot is going outside. So again, I don't know if it was deliberate.
A questioner in the room asks, today Bloomberg reported that 60% of Dollar Tree customers make more than $100,000 a year, and half of its new stores opened in wealthy areas. Will there soon be no place for non-multimillionaires to shop, I think is the point. Anyone have an opinion on that?
I don't.
Everybody's trying to figure out how to stretch a dollar, whether you're making $20,000 a year or $100,000 a year. So Dollar Tree, there's some good deals at Dollar Tree. I shop at Dollar Tree.
Chaim, I think this one is for you, but I welcome you two as well. How will AI impact personal wealth and social order? How should one's investment strategy change?
My view, long term, it's very disruptive. It's very disruptive because we are heading into this revolution, but governments are not set up or don't look at the big picture. This revolution is changing the job market, I believe. It's changing changing economies, changing life expectancy eventually. I'm not going to go into why, but life expectancy is about to go up, which means that pension is going to be a big problem, which means that total income is going to be a big problem. And governments are just not working and to solve that and look at how the new social order is going to be. So I'm looking at on a lot of uncertainty in the coming years from a social, from a personal wealth perspective. Sources of income are going to change quite a lot. It's not going to be the traditional one. Wealth is going to come in different ways. So there's going to be massive disruption going forward.
Okay, so where are your investments?
What? Bank of America.
You have your retirement assets in Bank of America stock?
I'm only have stocks of Bank of America. That's what I'm allowed to. Unfortunately, that's Don't rub it in.
Can I speak briefly to the,
Please, please, please.
on the social disorder part of the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
There is potential for social disorder in the wake of any major technological transformation, and this is going to be one. The way you don't know exactly how it's going to play out, okay? But what we do know is that equipping young people with reasoning, analysis, communication, social interaction skills, those things serve people well across a very wide range of occupations and activities. And I do worry that so many of our young people are going through a schooling system that doesn't prepare them for this disrupted future world. So if we want to lessen the prospects for social disorder, we need to fix our education system.
Oh, I can't agree more.
Are you
Major in the liberal arts.
And is that what you're advocating? What Martha just said?
I didn't catch what Marcia.
Major in the liberal arts.
Teaching the humanities.
Well,
teaching
liberal arts
people
is
to think
as long
opposed-
as they're actually learning how to think, and it's
Right.
not just
Creativity,
grievance studies.
I so
Well,
really
and
agree.
also you
I
have
really,
to,
really agree.
I mean, today with AI, as you're teaching the liberal arts, you have to figure out how to design assignments so they're actually doing the assignment and not just running it through ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Really, really agree.
Steve, if importers are bearing the brunt of the tariffs, won't that reduce their margins and slow down their hiring?
Well, we have seen slow hiring, and I think I do think it's partly because of the uncertainty and perhaps the low margins around the tariff policy. And so, what hasn't happened thus far in the economy is lots of job loss. Okay, job loss. That's not where the rubber is hitting the road. It is there is slow hiring in certain sectors that are affected by technological advances, but across the board in the economy, and that is partly, not entirely. There's other things in the mix, but it's partly due to the uncertainties around Trump's economic policies.
The economic jobs report that came out this morning showed numbers for January, and we talked about this backstage earlier. If you don't put too much stock in the actual January numbers, because those January numbers that are published are very much influenced by what's called a seasonal adjustment. They have to make an adjustment for how January usually is, and if Christmas is different, if December is different, then January is different. So I would say skip that part of the report. The other part of the report, though, is every year they do what they call the benchmark adjustment, where they go back and adjust the monthly figures from the previous year or two based on additional data that they've gathered from the state governments, which resulted in a total, I don't know if you saw this number, a total job gain in 2025 of 180,000 jobs, total. So 15,000 a month, much lower than we had anticipated, much lower than we've seen. So it's a slow growth economy. A lot of that's because of the shedding of jobs by the federal government, but there is very slow growth in the sectors that Steve's talking about.
How concerned are the two of you about the quality of the U.S. government's once ironclad economic statistics, given the things that happened in 2025?
I personally, I'm not concerned, and I'm not concerned partly because I've talked to Erica McIntarfer, who was the commissioner of the BLS who got fired when they did the adjustments last time, and have talked to the people in the BLS who do the data. And so right now, I'm not concerned about the quality of the data. There's the whole shutdown, and the shutdown mucked up a couple of months. I'm not concerned about the quality of the data. But going forward, there's always the risk that Erica's not the only person who's going to get fired for bad numbers. And if they get to the point where they fire the people who are actually doing the work.
In other words, she told you her career public servants who worked under her are still doing a good job. Don't worry about it for now. Is that's
met them.
the gist of it, Steve?
I have a slightly different view. It doesn't, not really a disagreement, but long before 2025, there had been and continues to be a deterioration in the quality of the survey data that comes out of government statistical agencies. And it's not because they're doing a bad job.
Right.
It's because people don't respond to surveys anymore.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, and it's not that they randomly don't respond. There are certain types of people, wealthier people, who are busy. They don't respond to surveys. So the traditional sources of information about things like employment, wages, the unemployment rate, those are already of much lower quality now than they were 10 or 20 years ago. And I don't think that the government statistical agencies have been quick enough to respond to that, but it's partly because they have been seriously strained on the budgetary side long before Trump.
I don't mean to be cheeky about this, but wouldn't AI be extremely helpful to them in that regard?
AI is a magic bullet. No, AI is
it's a tool.
That's where I'm coming. AI is a tool for possibly processing non-survey types of data that aren't currently being exploited. Yeah, there's potential there.
Chaim, from an IR, from an investor relations perspective, who is winning the AI race, China or the U.S.? So many AI companies are based in California. Can we count on that growth for the U.S. economy?
So, no, that's a really good question. The race is very, very tight. Right now, the U.S. is still the leader in AI because U.S. is controlling probably the bedrock, which is semiconductor technology. If we have this conversation, give or take a year ago, I would tell you that U.S. is by far the leader. It's became a very tight race ever since the DeepSeek moment, which is the Sputnik moment for AI. The DeepSeek models are amazing models. 90% cheaper than the American models, 90% cheaper. And what occurred to me in the last couple of months when I traveled the world and talked to many companies and many investment houses and so on, and CEOs, is that the penetration of the Chinese model is so much higher than what people are envisioning or thinking about right now, using them so much more. If you have the same product 90% cheaper, of course you're going to use it. So yeah, maybe there's risk about other stuff and security and so on, but most investors and most companies are willing to take this risk. The second inflection point that we'll see with China is that China have announced on semiconductor independency by 2027. If they'll get there or not, I'm hearing many different views. It's so complicated. But if this will happen, this is a massive game changer. And I've briefly mentioned quantum, which is bigger, much bigger than AI. China is investing 3 times more than the US when it comes to quantum.
Let me push on this very important point of semiconductor independence by 2027. It strikes me there's only one way for China to achieve that, and that's to count Taiwan as part of their semiconductor industry.
Well, not necessarily. If you look at the SMIC and the facilities that are being right now in China, there is a possibility. But to agree with you, China announced on the annexation of Taiwan by 2027. Guess why those two dates are the same?
Strategic plan. Yeah, Steve, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to interject. It's not exactly what you asked, but it's an important consideration here. Historically, the technological prowess of the United States and the commercial benefits that flow from that have rested on 2 pillars that have been somewhat under assault. One is we are a magnet for among the most talented scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs around the world. That's been true in the last 80 years. That's been somewhat eroded. Second, the American university system, for all its flaws, and believe me, I would be happy to go on about its flaws, has been a tremendous source of fundamental research development that indirectly supports the more the more commercially oriented. And that is also, for a distinct set of reasons perhaps, come under some stress. So I worry that aside from the kinds of, which companies are doing great today or this week or next week, these underlying fundamental sources of United States technological and scientific prowess, they're under considerable strain right now, and I think we should pay due attention to them and make sure we shore them up.
Yeah.
Yep, and I think if you could sort of do one of these Google trend analysis that is trending, that there is consensus that is important and people are talking about it, these 2 things more and more.
Well, they're talking about it. I don't think everybody got the message in the Trump administration, but
Right.
So I'm gonna end with a question that really distills it all for you from the audience. I am 89 years old. How much do you recommend in fixed income and how much in equities?
Money market.
To whoever you are who asked that question.
Well done.
Yeah. Who wants it?
well,
I would put it in money market. If you were my
That's fixed
mom, I
income.
would say, yeah, I would say fixed
Depends
income.
what you want to do with the money is what I would say, but go-
I'd say unless those AI advances in lifespan are going to really hit soon, just enjoy your life. Go out and start spending it.
Chaim,
I agree with Steve. I would just say one thing now. 89 right now is an age that is going to be quite normal and more. We are the generation that I'm a big believer that we're going to pass 100 on average. So there's quite a lot of time. But I agree, just enjoy life right now.
with that response, in conclusion, I'll make an observation that everyone on this panel is very true to themselves in every answer that they've given to every question. Thank you to the three of you. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you very much.